Innovation is in our veins. Soon the whole world will know our names. Sharing our knowledge and freedom reign. We here for the people, you know it's our way. Setting foundations is part of the dream. It doesn't matter if you're new to the game. Listen up now, cause we all gon' say, elevate, 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 higher, elevate, 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 higher. We gon' rise up, we all gon' shine. Work through adversity, stay on the grind. Elevate, elevate, this is our time. Elevate, elevate.
Welcome to the Elevate Podcast, everyone. It's so great to have you all on once again. There's a lot to get into. Lots happened this weekend, hasn't there? Carney visit Qatar. Trump is saying, we want Greenland. And there's just a lot of nonsense going on. And we're excited to get into it all with you on this beautiful electric Monday morning. There is so much to talk through. I got a list of about 15, 20 articles we got to talk through. But first thing I got to address, I'm just so excited, I'm stumbling over my words, is we're going to address the issue of what really is Trump's plan right now. Obviously, we talked about the New World Order last week and everything Carney's been trying to do. And there's some significant things you got to think about behind all of that we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about the news that's on the forefront that happened this weekend. And then we're going to get into why the heck is all of this happening? Why is Trump going after Greenland? Why is NATO getting fired up and sending soldiers to Greenland? What is happening with this Middle Eastern peace deal in Venezuela? And how does that all come together? And guess what? It actually does. And we're going to be talking about that today. And so we're going to be addressing that. But first, we're going to hit these first 10 or nothing. All right, for the first a little bit here shortly, we're gonna get to that story, and then we're gonna run through some of these stories that are at the top of the hour that we need to discuss. Before you do that, make sure you hit the like button on this live stream. Make sure you share with your friends. Make sure you vote on the poll. I'm curious. I've been receiving some notes from some friends this weekend saying they've all of a sudden got an insane amount of ads from BYD or NIO, which are Chinese EV manufacturers. All of a sudden, bang, boom. After that deal happens, all of a sudden ads are showing up. So we'll be curious to see if anyone has also been getting ads from them. Right now, the polls are showing, let's see. Luckily, it's a 96% no right now with about 130 votes in. I'll be curious if you could vote there. Just kind of get your perspective if you've been getting any of those ads recently. Really happy to be on here with you this beautiful, beautiful Monday morning. First and foremost, let's get into our first story, shall we? So, this has been a talking point the past little bit, is new polls came out from Abacus Data, and federal vote intention by age, 50% conservative between the 18 to 29-year-old range, 60 and over, still 52% liberal. Isn't that fascinating? Vote intentions, again, broken down by age bracket, 18 to 29, 50%, 30 to 44 is 41% for conservatives, 45 to 59 is 43%. But then you get to that 60 and over. Retirement funds. All of a sudden goes 52% liberal. Very fascinating, isn't it? And then overall, 40%. This one killed me, dude. 40% tied. And this is the issue. In this exact same poll, they are also doing favorability between Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre. And Pierre Poilievre is at like a negative 11 net favorability. Like it's getting bad for him. However, the party still stands strong. After all of the hate, all of the mudslinging, all of the just trying to bring down Poilievre, his party's still standing strong. Because I remember when Trudeau was down in the dumps, liberals were on the verge of getting completely blown off the map. So, is it really the leader? Or is it the media trying to shape a narrative? Very, very fascinating. We have to keep moving forward, though. Let's make sure I get rid of that. Sorry, folks. Next story here. All right, I'm just going to go to this. So, 53% of Canadians prefer a lower tariff that balances industry protection and consumer affordability similar to Europe, while 29% support removing the tariff to lower costs and avoid trade retaliation from China. So this was not surprising, though unfortunate. 100% tariff. People that support a 100% tariff that protects Canada's auto industry from Chinese competition and aligns Canada with the U.S. is in favor of 19%. So very much the minority. 53% support the idea of having a lower tariff that balances protection for Canada's auto industry with improving affordability for consumers in line with Europe. And then 29% are in favor of no tariffs so that consumers can access the lowest cost electric vehicles available while also preventing trade retaliation from China. This is why I find this a really intriguing poll. Again, it's about, trying your best when you do polls like this, when you're putting out polls. Your goal as someone who's bringing together data is not to bias the subject. And in this case, it was fascinating that the word China was left out of that middle option. Oh, we need to have a lower tariff that balances protection for Canada's auto industry with improving affordability for consumers in line with Europe. So we're in favor of a 6.1% tariff on Chinese EVs, but we didn't mention China in this. It's like, oh, but Europe does it. Oh, okay, well, of course people are going to lean towards that. So more so of another fascinating batch of data here. I really do like the work that Abacus Data does. However, these statements seem to be a little off. So it just doesn't seem like to be the best. However, we move forward because Carney was in Qatar, or some would pronounce Qatar. I'm going to say Qatar on this live stream today. But he was asked about his statements about the New World Order, asked about his statements about what happened with China last week, and as well as how that relates to his trip to Qatar and meeting with another nation who is allied with our enemies, who doesn't have the same values we do. And then for the first time, a prime minister has gone to visit Qatar. He's asked about this. And I'm going to play the first minute and a half, 2 minutes of this, because I just need you you're going to want to tune out. I'm going to warn you, you're going to want to tune out. However, you need to listen to his words. It's really important, because that's how Mark Carney communicates. He likes to go around and kind of like be very ambiguous with his statements and try to we got to think about this, and then we got to think about this. And then it just forces the normal person to tune out. Try your best not to tune out on this answer.
Prime Minister, I wonder if I can draw a line between a speech you made last April in which you said that if the United States was no longer ready to lead countries interested in trade, that Canada would lead. Put that into context for this week's visit. Has that begun? Other countries, which other countries are joining with you in this effort? And whether or not you discussed this effort with President Xi, and he might be interested, or you might be interested in having China join this effort.
Okay. So this is an important question. Let me generalize the question first and then go more specifically, which is what's happening at pace and at scale is that a number of the multilateral relationships, institutions, rules-based systems are being eroded by various decisions of various countries, the United States included. And the consequence of that is that there's a reduction in freer trade. Much more trade is tariff-based or otherwise restricted. And there is virtually no, with all due respect to those who are trying to push, but virtually no multilateral progress in these areas. Where there is progress, and where Canada and like-minded countries are looking to make progress, is through plurilateral deals, fancy word, economist knows it, which is multiple countries but not all countries. So an example of that is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Another example of it is the European Union, amongst the European Union, but the European Union with like-minded countries, Canada included. You just saw this week the European Union deal with Mercosur. One of the things we're doing, and
so you kind of get the gist there. He's going into all of the different details of we got to think about this, and we've done this, and we have this relationship with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and then the EU, and blah, 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 blah. Again, trying to drum around the subject to essentially dull you to tears and make you not want to listen to it anymore, which he does a very good job of doing. But this is the part I really want to hit on, is the fact that he's, going around, we got to think about this, and we've met with this group, and we met with this country, and we've talked about these various matters at this point in time. And quite frankly, the deal that was done so far with Qatar is something that Moose and Loose brought up. David said this, which I thought was fascinating, was Mark Carney is the first Canadian PM to officially visit Qatar. His first order of business, removing dual taxation, immediately benefiting Brookfield. On December 9th, Brookfield signed a $20 billion deal at a 1.25% management fee. That's $250 million. A 5% withholding tax equals $12.5 million Carney just saved Brookfield. And here's the thing is, quite frankly, anything Carney does, you can link it to Brookfield. That's just the reality of what we're dealing with. It's funny, in this case, I don't necessarily care too much about this deal. If I'm being honest, it's a spicy take, but I don't really care because it's actually there will be some reciprocal benefit for our businesses to get investment from Qatar and vice versa. You know, so I'm not too concerned about that. However, what I am concerned about is why Qatar, why now? Why China, why now? Why the UAE, why now? Why a lot of these nations that we don't typically align with, we are now trying to expand trade with. And again, the excuse is given. Whoa, look what the U.S. is doing. We're trying to diversify. Yeah, I hear you. However, why not go to pro-democracies? Why has it been China? Why has it been Qatar? Why has it been the UAE? And specifically with the UAE, that was a $70 billion pledge the United Arab Emirates gave us. A $70 billion pledge that we still don't know what Carney gave in return for that. As I said, the UAE is not exactly people or a country that's interested in philanthropy, wanting to donate to the cause because Canada's having such a hard time. What of our resources did Carney leverage or negotiate in that? We still don't know. So that's another question. These deals with Qatar, I have more of a concern about Qatar's relationship with China because they're a close ally of China. They don't really care about this actual deal when it comes to the dollars on page right now. And the fact that he visited Qatar shortly after his visit to China. That's where my concern is right now. That's my issue. And that's where I'm trying to kind of bring this all together and figure this all out, because Mark Carney is getting us into bed and in ties with countries or at least in more in-depth ties with countries that we probably shouldn't be at this point in time. As I said last live stream, 10 years ago, the deal with China would have been like, okay, fair enough, whatever. At this point in time, when we are on the precipice of World War III, we are on the precipice of incredible conflict around the globe, specifically between the West and China, Russia, and their allies. I'm worried. I'm worried about where that actually ends up leaving us. But when Carney was asked about the relationship with Qatar, what this means, well, he wants to deepen our cultural ties with Qatar, which was a fascinating statement here. Listen to this 1 minute.
When the people of different countries are familiar with each other's cultures and perspectives, they're enriched and they trust each other more. They also want to do more together, to build together. And to that end, Canada and Qatar are strengthening our people-to-people ties and our cultural ties. This year, Qatar begins its year of culture, building lasting relationships through cultural, educational, business, and creative exchanges. Canada, to further these efforts, will expand our air transport agreement to increase direct flights to this country. We'll also lead to more tourism and business between our nations. Finally, in the spirit of cultural exchange, I've extended an invitation to His Highness to visit Canada as our two countries face off in our first, kickoff in our first ever World Cup match this June in Vancouver. On that note, I also want to thank
This is the second time with the second country that we don't have really aligned values with, that he's been talking about deepening cultural ties with. He said the same thing with China. We're going to bring their culture over here. We're going to have cultural ties with China. He did the same thing with Qatar. The same country that will imprison or kill you if you are gay. Like, that's the cultural ties we're talking about here, folks. So what's been concerning to me is that he wants to deepen cultural ties with countries that don't share our democratic values, that don't share our Western values. So why are we going to let these countries have a cultural impact on our people? I said it before, politics is downstream from culture. why are you going to let these countries have an impact on our culture if you don't want to impact the politics? That's a question, right? We know that Mark Carney is more interested in control, very interested in centralizing authority. You know, things that are aligned with how China may do things, how Qatar may do things. And I think that's another situation to think about. As I said, politics are downstream from culture. You impact culture, you impact politics. So if you bring these cultures here, what does that mean for us? As you try to distance yourself from the U.S., which is a Western democracy, our neighbor, our best ally. Now you're saying, no, it's not enough to say, well, we're trying to deepen trade. We're trying to diversify trade. No, this is beyond diversifying trade at this point. You're now trying to impact Canadian culture by engaging in cultural deals with countries that don't align with us. Something to think about. And that has been top of mind. And I kind of want to do a quick brisk through all this because of what we're seeing right now on the global stage. Carney going to China, Carney going to Qatar, Carney going to the UAE, Carney talking about the New World Order, Carney talking about how things are changing. There's been a hinge moment. There's been a rupture. You know, all those words that, well, it's because, quite frankly, what he's saying is true. He's saying it clear as day. What we are interpreting what his words are may not be exactly what those words mean. However, we are talking about the same concept here. I go to this. Carney, weighing sending soldiers to Greenland for military exercises with NATO allies, sources say. Prime Minister Mark Carney is considering sending soldiers to Greenland for military exercises with North Atlantic Treaty Organization, yada yada, as U.S. President Donald Trump threatens tariffs on European nations unless they let him purchase and control the semi-autonomous island. Two senior Canadian officials have told CBC News that a set of contingency plans were drawn up last week and presented to the federal government. A Royal Canadian Air Force contingent is already taking part in a pre-planned NORAD exercise in Greenland, but the Prime Minister is weighing whether to send additional forces as part of a sovereignty exercise the Danes are planning, which could include drills to protect the Arctic island's critical infrastructure. Given the political implications of Canada joining and the potential blowback from the Trump administration, both sources said they're not certain which way the government is leaning. CBC is, of course, not naming the sources. The situation with Greenland is heating up, and it's important to pay attention to it because it's almost the final piece in everything we've been witnessing and seeing over the past few years. So we know Mark Carney. We know that he's a part of that political class, the old school way of doing things in terms of how our finances work, how he's trying to move it into a more centralized perspective. He wants to team up with the rest of these globalists who run these other countries to centralize authority and extract and exert more control over people. However, there's been a weird country in that alliance, the NATO alliance, who's been a little difficult. They've elected a president twice that has kind of been messing up their plans and their ideas, and they're not so much enjoying it at the moment. And what we're witnessing with Greenland is a response to all of that. And with that, we are going to shift our perspective to what's been happening in the Middle East. Then we're going to move to Venezuela. Then we're going to move back to Greenland. And we're going to discuss all this right now. We're going to get to what is our prime time story of the hour. But first, let's check out what our poll has been saying. Have you received an ad on Instagram or TikTok from BYD or NIO this weekend, which again are Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers? I'm happy to see that 94% of you have not received them. So that's good. 6% though, 6% of a 500 votes is something to be said. Anything in the chat that should be of interesting? Let's go. Paul Weens 5918 says Canadian soldiers are the ones with white beards and sneakers on, a paper straw and some beans. Ha ha ha. Rubaduck. Rubberduck, sorry. $2 super chat says, if Carney goes full China, I see NORAD and disavailing. I'm guessing falling apart, essentially, is what you're trying to say there. Jessica's doing a great job, as are mediators, and I believe, or moderators, mediators, both are the same thing. However, let's get into our top story of the hour, shall we, my friends? It's getting wild up in here. First off, Trump is reportedly turning his attention to Canada and focusing on its vulnerability. President Donald Trump is reportedly turning his attention to Canada and becoming fixated on the country's vulnerability to foreign adversaries. In recent weeks, Trump has griped that the Arctic reaches of the Great White North are exposed to Chinese and Russian encroachment. Multiple unnamed officials told NBC News. U.S. officials are now reportedly looking into coordinating with Ottawa to strengthen Canada's northern border. Trump is really worried about the U.S. continuing to drift in the Western Hemisphere and is focused on this, one official told the outlet. And that is a very, very key perspective here. U.S. is continuing to drift in the Western Hemisphere, and Trump is now focused on this. This is a very, very real situation we have upon us. I want to, first off, direct your attention to this YouTube channel. It is called the Promethean Updates, and they've been popping off recently, going viral on all kinds of different videos. This one is almost hitting 500,000 views at this point. Mark Carney, Panic, the New World Order is dead. And, what they've been discussing, and what this video discusses, is the world order as it currently stands. Is how the world order started with the UK, with the British Empire, and that we're still experiencing that order today. And everything they allude to in this video are very factual. It is very real. Everything is verifiable. I went through everything they shared in this video. It's all true. However, what can be left up to discussion, can be left up to debate, is the conclusions they've made of what Donald Trump is doing, what he's going after. But right now, the thesis of this video is that Donald Trump is essentially attacking the old system, attacking the old British system that NATO's using to do regime change wars, to cause chaos in different parts of the globe, to push the interests of multi-billion-dollar corporations, push the interest of these different countries to destabilize and to essentially get rich. And Trump is now fighting against that system. So if you're interested, I would check that video out. It is very fascinating. But this is one of the first things we're talking about here is some are viewing Trump's behavior as irrational. You're hearing that a lot, is irrational behavior. This doesn't make sense because it is so out of left field, I'll be honest. The minute, I heard, Trump talking about Greenland in 2019, I was like, okay, whatever. And then it started picking up heat. And then obviously the story hit this weekend. It was like, we need Greenland. We need Greenland. Venezuela was a shot across the bow for me personally, where I was like, whoa, what's going on with that? And that forced me to look into this stuff more deeply. And forgive me, I took up hours of my night last night looking into this, researching this. And so I have a plethora of notes to go over with you on these issues. Right now, what they're saying and what I'm seeing is Donald Trump is trying to upend that old system. The old system right now essentially is NATO, which started up in 1949, which essentially uses its influence to try and spread democracy across the globe, try to spread their culture across the globe, and then using the weapon of the United States as their personal bodyguard to go ahead and do that. And that's why we're seeing really a lot of frustration that's come out of Donald Trump, right? Of the lack of meeting of NATO targets coming from these countries, considering that the U.S. is protecting all of them. They're going and starting fights, and the U.S. has now had to go cash those checks, on top of the U.S. also going and starting those fights themselves over the past close to 75 years at this point. And Trump is like, we don't want to do that anymore. And Trump is now taking stances to go ahead and do that. We're seeing that with, again, the old neocon class. What they love to do is regime change. This is the whole thing, is let's go destabilize a country, change out the leadership. Let's go take their resources and extract it and use it for ourselves. That's the old neocon way. Yet what we saw with Donald Trump hasn't been a full regime change. We've been calling it regime change because he went into Venezuela, took Maduro, took him back for court in the United States. However, Donald Trump has not, I repeat, has not changed the regime in Venezuela. He's actually committed to working with whoever is left over from after taking Maduro. He's not committed to switching the regime, switching the leadership, going with someone different. Even though that person went into the White House to present him with her Nobel Peace Prize, he's still like, no, we're going to work with who Maduro's people were and keep some level of stability in the country. That was fascinating. Then we look over to what happened in the Middle East and what we've been seeing in the Middle East. And you've been seeing him pull out troops from the Middle East, he doesn't want to be the world police in the Middle East anymore. He is now requiring these countries to produce their own security. He's requiring these countries to take care of themselves and protect their own resources. Because what was happening is the United States was going in and protecting the oil, as we all know. But however, another country was using those countries to get energy, using those countries for their oil, and that would be China. So effectively, the United States have been bankrolling China to a degree where America's paying for the security. America's paying for soldiers over there. America's paying to protect these assets that China is benefiting from. So now Donald Trump has pulled resources out of the Middle East and will force those countries to protect their own resources. And he's bringing that back home, bringing it back to the Western Hemisphere. We saw it even we're seeing it with his peace plan right now that he named Mark Carney to. We're going to get to that here shortly. It's all very fascinating, and it seems like it's one big chess game that Mark Carney and the rest of NATO is trying to react to, and Donald Trump is just moving things around. And it's disrupting a lot. We saw this from the New York Times, where they admitted it. That's exactly what Donald Trump is doing. The great unraveling has begun. You see in the first paragraph, it says, President Donald Trump's decision to launch a secretive pre-dawn military operation in Venezuela to grab President Nicolas Maduro is a blatant assault on the international legal order. The action threatens an end to an era of historic peace and return us to a world in which might makes right. The cost will be paid in human lives. And then they get in the second paragraph here. Last year marked the 80th anniversary of the 1945 United Nations Charter, a document signed by 51 nations at the close of World War II. The signatories pledged to act to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. The great powers have not gone to war with one another since, and no UN member state has disappeared as a result of the conquest. And this is what they're very worried about Donald Trump affecting and changing and implementing. And they don't like it. Donald Trump is effectively, without saying it, but is doing it, he's pulling the United States a little further away from NATO, a little further away from the UN. And that is strategic at this point in time. If we move over to our next story here. Trump invites Carney to join Board of Peace for Gaza. This is a fascinating story. Prime Minister Mark Carney has been asked by U.S. President Donald Trump to join the Board of Peace that will supervise the temporary governance of the Gaza Strip, a senior Canadian official told journalists traveling with the Prime Minister on his overseas trip. Carney will accept the invitation, the official said. Under U.S. plan that Israel and Hamas signed off on, a Palestinian technocratic body will be overseen by the International Board for a transitional period. So catch this. I know this might be dull, but this is fascinating. Donald Trump has appointed a board to oversee the transition of what's happening with Gaza. He appointed his own board for this transition. He's essentially appointing a technocratic body to oversee this and see the transition through. When I was talking about he's pulling away from NATO, pulling away from the likes of the UN, this completely undermines the UN and what their job is. He went around the UN. He's like, no, I'm going to do it myself. The US is going to run this now. Donald Trump is trying to position the US to be the dominant superpower for years to come. And he's making strategic moves to pull the US out of these different agreements without saying it in order to shore up their own resources, their own military, and their own supremacy. And it's becoming increasingly hostile because, well, what we're seeing from China, what we're seeing from Russia. And NATO allies do not like it because they are not benefiting from the U.S. being their security guard anymore. And Trump is actually in the process of stripping power away from NATO, leaving these countries to have to figure out what they're going to do on their own. So what we're seeing here at this point in time is, as I said, Donald Trump has been essentially bankrolling things in the Middle East. Now he's pulling resources out. He's pulling these resources out and going somewhere different. And people say, well, it's a regime change. Is it? Look at this Truth Social post. If we can refresh it. Hopefully someday we get there. I promise I'm a human. During the Iranian protests, there has been a push for Trump to go in and bomb, a push for Trump to go in and really make America known in this conflict. He even wrote this, though. Iranian patriots, keep protesting. Take over your institutions. Save the names of the killers and abusers. They will pay a big price. I have canceled all meetings with Iranian officials until the senseless killing of protesters stops. Help is on its way. Make Iran great again. President Donald J. Trump. Everything Donald Trump's been doing with Iran, he's not been trying to get involved with it directly. He wants to see that situation figure itself out on its own. Donald Trump is not interested, from what I'm seeing, what I'm reading. Again, I want to really preface this. What I'm sharing right now is we're going to look at the stories. We're looking at the facts. I'm going to present you my perspective of my conclusions from what I'm seeing, but that's why we have the chat. We are going to discuss this after this, okay? So make sure you hold your thoughts, make sure you put it in the chat because I think it makes for a very good discussion. However, he doesn't want to get directly involved in the Middle East anymore. He doesn't want military personnel in the Middle East anymore, more than he has to. He doesn't want to do a direct regime change. He doesn't, unless he has to. That's why it was different from what we saw with Venezuela. We go back to, again, our hemisphere. So the United States right here, Venezuela is all the way down here. If I can highlight that, you see Venezuela down there. I can't see my cursor. They're about 2,000 kilometers from the shores of the United States. And China was getting a little too close to Venezuela. Thus why Trump made the decision he did with Maduro. He couldn't have it anymore. An illegitimate leader who was cozying up to China's enemy, to the U.S. enemies, and said, we can't have that. Either China has access to that oil or we're going to have access to that oil. That's a destabilized country. Now I'm going to have to do something about it. And took the leader and still working with the leadership that's still there. Again, similar to what he's been doing in Gaza and trying to get that situation figured out. You can agree, you can disagree with how he's doing it. However, this seems to be his approach at this point in time. Because right now what we're seeing is with Donald Trump making this change and trying to pull troops out and maneuver and change resources and fill in other areas, China's now trying to fill in that gap. And that's the problem that NATO has with Donald Trump and what he's doing, is now it's creating a power vacuum where China's looking to fulfill it. We see it here. After the Maduro situation, China's like, we strongly condemn Donald Trump against international law. All the things that typically would be the role of the United States when something big would happen on the global stage. We see it here with how Donald Trump has pulled the U.S. away from the World Health Organization and what they're donating and giving in funds to the World Health Organization. China promptly took that over and donated $500 million to the WHO to step in for the gap that the U.S. left. China is now the number one donor to the World Health Organization. So you're going to see it. Every place the United States is pulling out from, China's trying to fill it in and be the next global supremacist, the next global leader. That's what they're trying to do. And right now, that's why it's getting fascinating, is because Donald Trump is dismantling the old world and China's trying to fill in the gap of the old world. And that's where the tension's happening at the moment. is Donald Trump is saying that old world's not working for the U.S., and I'm going to start making moves so that U.S. is in a better stance from moving forward and not so vulnerable to whatever happens with these groups and treaties. And China's like, okay, that's fine. You go do that. We're going to fill the gap now. We're going to have our influence. We're going to move into these areas. And that's where it's like, who's going to win? Whose strategy is going to win? Is Donald Trump's strategy going to win? Or is China's strategy going to win? And could all this backfire? Because right now we're seeing is we're on the precipice of something very, very delicate in the world balance at the moment. Either one side wins and we continue on with our democracy, or the other side's going to win and we are going to be taken over by a communist dictatorship. That's why right now what Donald Trump's doing is necessary, but it's spooky all at the same time because it has some very real world consequences. We are seeing it here where, let me see this, I'm double checking, get all my notes here. Yeah, so here's the thing that brings us over to Greenland is as ice melts in the Arctic, it's opening up more trade routes. And China's been trying to establish those trade routes and get product over to Europe. It takes about 40% less time to go through the Arctic than it does to go through the Suez Canal at this point in time. And right now, China and Russia are just dominating the Arctic right now. And Trump knows that's where you need to start establishing a presence. And that's why we saw that article earlier where he's really concerned about Canada's Arctic and why this whole situation with Greenland is becoming a lot more tenuous is because of the activity that's happening up in the Arctic at the moment. And Trump and the U.S. doesn't have as much of a footprint up there as that they would like to. China's has a footprint in the Arctic right now because of Russia and also because of Canada. Canada has allowed China to do drills in the Arctic with their military. And that doesn't bode well. And the U.S. doesn't like that. And the U.S. doesn't like the presence that China has in the Arctic right now. So that's why they're getting so fired up about Greenland at this point in time. And the thing is, this is nothing new. The U.S. has tried to purchase Greenland multiple times over the past 150 years, something like that, back to 1867. I'll list out all the presidents who have tried to purchase Greenland over the past, dating back to 1867. So Andrew Johnson tried to buy Greenland in 1867. William Taft then tried again in 1910. Harry Truman then tried again in 1946. Eisenhower tried in 1955. And then it went for 60 plus years until Donald Trump tried in 2019 to no avail, but is now getting more aggressive in 2025. Well, why? Why is Donald Trump getting more aggressive on Greenland? Well, it's because Greenland and Denmark have had a bit of a tenuous relationship, which I didn't know about. This has been fairly new to me ever since this stuff started popping up. And Greenland's always wanted autonomy. Or I should say Greenland has been wanting autonomy from Denmark in particular. And they want to be able to make decisions for themselves. And because of that tension in that relationship, well, China, because of their presence in the Arctic, has been going to Greenland to invest, get their hands on their resources, do deals with Greenland. And this has been going on for quite some time now. And Donald Trump's been taking notice. U.S. has been taking notice of it. And China has been trying to do something that they did in Africa with their Belt and Road Initiative. You probably know about that, where China's gone into Africa and essentially given money to all these African countries to build infrastructure. And this was China's, again, play to establish dominance in the world, to establish their footprint, to establish cultural relevance on the world stage. And they effectively, to the tune of, indebted African countries to the tune of $180 billion. And this was all a plan of China's in order to have control over resources in Africa. And they went in saying, hey, we're going to build this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this for you. Just here's some money to get it built. And they said, yeah, perfect. We need investment in our country. We'll take it. We'll do it. That's fine. But now these African countries don't have any way to pay that back. So China's just effectively had control and influence over certain nations in Africa. They're looking to do the same thing with Greenland. They call it their, I just want to make sure I got this name correct. Sorry, folks. I just want to make sure I get this right. Yeah, that's it. They call it their Polar Silk Road strategy. And this is what they're doing through the Arctic. And they're doing that with Greenland. They approached Greenland trying to get deals done, to get their hands on their mines, get their hands on their resources, give them a bunch of money to, work on these deals. And they essentially wanted to indebt Greenland so much that now China then has control and influence over Greenland. Again, having effectively control over the Arctic at that point and in control over these trade routes. China tried to get close to Venezuela. Trump said, no, we're done with that. We're going to take the oil in Venezuela. You're not going to have it. And now China's trying to have that influence in Greenland. And Trump says, no. If right now, if it's between us and China, then we're going to take it. And that's why he's been getting so aggressive in his rhetoric over and surrounding China. If you remember, the official opposition leader in Greenland hopped on CBC to talk these issues out. And the CBC was trying to craft a certain narrative to hate the United States. And this opposition leader said, we're not going to be your punching bag. We're not going to be your pawn. We're going to tell you exactly how we're feeling. And we're not going to make this a whole let's hate on the United States situation. It's fascinating.
States. He is not, and neither is his wife. So let's dial down the rhetoric. And one of the important things you have to remember is that everybody seems so keen on talking about the annexation from the U.S. as a threat, completely ignoring that we have been annexed by Denmark. And that's why we're trying to get independence as well. So I don't see how the world society is trying to uphold the international rule-based world when they at the same time disregard how Denmark annexed Greenland in the first place. So no, from my point of view, I'm looking for possibilities and options. I'm not looking to make an enemy out of the United States because that's neither to the benefit of NATO, European Union, or the US. So right now, instead of using Greenland as a punching bag between the US and everybody that seem to not like the US, I think people should back off Greenland and say, well, let the Greenlanders talk to the US and let them figure out what they want, instead of saying, why aren't you afraid of the US?
Sorry about that. That was kind of weird halfway through there, wasn't it? But we got the point. So Greenland wants to make their own decisions. They want to have a conversation. They don't want to be a pawn for the NATO essentially attacking and being upset with the US. There's like, we're done with this. But this is, again, right now, everything we're seeing is it's either up to US or it's up to China. That's why I'm saying we're coming to a precipice right now where it's getting more and more tense. And when Mark Carney says we're having an increasingly dangerous world, this is the stuff he's talking about. And when he was in front of China talking about the new world order, they're hoping for a new world order in terms of what they wanted to bring in terms of more technocratic rule, centralizing authority, centralizing data, all of this. And Donald Trump's like, yeah, I know you guys want to centralize that authority, but we're kind of done with that whole NATO. You guys trying to do all this nonsense, the World Economic Forum stuff. We're kind of done with that. We're going to do our own thing. And we don't really care if we upset you. Again, look at this very tense and loud statement. We're not going to read this whole thing, but you get the idea here. And we'll read the first two sentences. A truth post that Donald Trump posted would have been just 2 days ago. We have subsidized Denmark and all of the countries of the European Union and others for many years by not charging them tariffs or any other forms of remuneration. Oh, I can't speak today. Holy jumping. Now, after centuries, it is time for Denmark to give back. World peace is at stake. China and Russia want Greenland, and there's not a thing that Denmark can do about it. They currently have 2 dog sleds as protection, one added recently. Only the United States of America under President Donald Trump can play in this game, and very successfully at that. Nobody will touch a sacred piece of land, especially since the national security of the United States and the world at large is at stake. On top of everything else, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland have journeyed to Greenland for purposes unknown. This is a very dangerous situation for the safety, security, and survival of our planet, and we'll end it there. He says it all very clearly right here of what is actually happening. All the moves he's made, he's trying to pull resources out of the Middle East, focus on the Western Hemisphere, secure the trading routes, secure resources so that the US can have dominance and beat China. This on top of the AI race and the NVIDIA chips. China can't get access to these NVIDIA chips for this reason in particular. Whoever wins the AI race will win dominance. And right now, that's where we're witnessing a race right now for that number one top dog approach. The issue I have with Mark Carney's statement with the New World Order is that he accompanied that with a multipolar world, which that term in particular is particularly used by China, is particularly used by Russia to talk about how they're going to be the ones who run the new world. And that really showed me that Carney's like, and the rest of NATO, because we saw Carney go to China. Starmer is going to be going over to China fairly shortly. NATO is proving a point to Donald Trump that we will play with another country, the other superpower, if you don't play ball with us. And Donald Trump says, okay, let's do it. That's what's happening right now. So we are witnessing with the situation here, if we bring it back to, I think it was this article here. This one. Carney Wang sending soldiers to Greenland, and we're seeing all the NATO countries sending soldiers to Greenland right now. That's part of the reason, is they are not happy with the United States pulling out of their deals because he's removing their power on the world stage. And this is why they're starting to fight back. And we bring it back to the situation what happened with the EV deal with Mark Carney. And we saw Donald Trump's reaction to it. Actually, I don't even think I had that article up here. I'm going to pull that article up here shortly. Trump to Carney deal. I should have had that article up already. Here it is. U.S. President Donald Trump was asked to respond to news that Prime Minister Mark Carney and Chinese President Xi Jinping came to an agreement on trade. Well, it's okay, he says. That's what he should be doing. Trump told reporters Friday at the White House, if you can get a deal with China, you should do that. Remember how we were all freaking out on this show? We're freaking out, and conservative creators across and many others were freaking out over this whole deal. It was like, what's going on? Why are you giving this all up? What's happening? And Donald Trump said, we'll see. I think it's a good idea. I think you should be doing that. Get all of the people around, especially Jameson, who came out, who is a trade representative for the United States, said this is a bad idea for Canada. All the representatives around the U.S. are saying this is a bad idea, but Trump said, that's okay. It seems to be a play on Donald Trump's part to see what China actually does, because Trump does want to do a deal with China. He does. He wants China to build their vehicles in the United States. However, what China is doing is they're building their cars in China and shipping them over here, which is not what Trump wants to do. And he wants to see if it gets as bad as he thinks it could get. And Carney is the litmus test. He's allowing Carney to be the test dummy. All right, we'll let them get that deal with China. We'll see what happens. How does China operate, and what do they do? All this is what is currently happening, and as well is at the end of the day, Trump does hold the cards. Because if anything does go south of that deal with China, between Canada and China, he does have that CUSMA review, and he will pull that out if he has to. So that is the end of my tirade. That brings back to, again, this issue here. Brings us back to this story here of why Trump is concerned with what's been happening in our Arctic and wants Canada to do more about it. And he needs to partner with Canada to get something done on top of this whole Greenland situation. It's getting weird, man. It's getting very weird. It's getting very tense. So we'll see where all this goes. Now we can go to the super chats. Now we can go to the chat. You guys are awesome. Holy jumping, we're at 3,000 concurrent viewers. That's different for us. That's different. Boys and girls, thank you so much. Holy jumping. Holy smokes. I love it. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the concurrent viewership. Your commitment to the show is very fantastic. Now let's go over to the chat. Holy smokes. Let's go. Just Me Nicole says we need a collapse. I'm guessing you meant to say collapse. We need a collapse of the EU, NATO. Then I would bet everything on that Carney would step down. That's what you meant. Collapse. Yeah. Yeah. It's. I don't want to see a collapse of NATO at this point in time. However, I want to see a dismantling. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. Yeah. If this is where things are going, I want to preface this. If this is where things are going, I would prefer to see NATO see a slow demolition than a full collapse, because that would just cause incredible chaos in the West and in the world. And then, boom, shots fired, we're going. So, and then I remember Jason James brought up in our interview on this show before Christmas, where he truly believes the next world war will be fought in our Arctic in Canada, and or just above Canada. So that's a concern. But thank you for the comment, Just Me Nicole. Lens62812 says, if Carney keeps up with China, Trump will roll up Canada and put it on the 51st shelf. Venezuela was 2,000 miles away. It will be a fortress America. Look at the risk map and don't forget the Monroe Doctrine, or as Donald Trump would say, the Dunroe Doctrine at this point. Yeah, I know people are thinking, anything's possible at this point because things are getting so chaotic on the global stage. But we'll see where things go. Potentially it could, if things don't get taken more seriously, potentially. I hope not. But I said anything's possible at this point. MT Fen 62 says, been watching for a while. I don't have a truckload of money, but here's something to help a bit. Thanks. Donates $5. Do you know what?
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate it. Just Me Nicole, the $10 super chat, says, Pierre needs to remind people how China took 2 Canadians as doing interference and they support Russia in Ukraine. Dig up clips of Carney saying those things and push those out to the mainstream media. Yeah, it's I'm trying to figure out what the strategy is going to be for the Conservatives on this one, because really at the end of the day, people are, getting whipped up by CBC on the issue of Greenland, on the issue of Venezuela. CBC's protecting Maduro. We saw they run cover for the guy, a dictator, which is very wild. So I know people's eyes are on this. I think, definitely focus should be pointed towards Carney's record on these issues and how he views them. But I think as well, continue to fight on the idea of affordability, because Carney wants to make it about everything but affordability. And so this is, again, those plays of saying what he said in China, doing what he's doing in Qatar. All of these are all play to kind of distract and move. And it is fast. It is something to think about. Josh Simmons, 90, says, do you have any constitutional grounds to throw out the government? We don't. We actually don't have any constitutional grounds to do so. There's a couple mechanisms where you can go to, the Governor General to essentially remove, or at least reconfigure Parliament to a degree where you're bringing in cooperation. But the Governor General is appointed by the Prime Minister, so they're never going to do anything at this point. It's kind of similar to when you're kind of having a tie in the House and Congress or the Senate, whatever it is in the United States. I can't remember which one where this rule is. When that tie in the votes happens, the vice president breaks the vote, and the vice president is, in this case, a Republican, so it's going to go the Republicans' way. It's similar with the Governor General. Like, we don't actually have an impeachment process in this country. Everything that's happened here, we have learned very quickly that we should be thinking about how we rethink how things operate constitutionally and our bill, our Charter of Rights and Freedoms and all this. So that's unfortunate. Wickenden 1969 says, NATO, National Alliance of Organized Terrorists. Whoa, that's heavy. That's heavy. Natalie Fournier 4385 dropping 279 on the chat. Thank you so much, folks. Really appreciate it. What a wild time it's been. We peaked at 3,000 concurrents. That's new for the show. That's very new for the show. We really do appreciate it very much so. It's been a wild time. We will see where all this ends up going. We are coming in and closing in on our hour of power. We looking at the poll here, over 1,100 votes. Have you received an ad on Instagram or TikTok from BYD or NIO or NIO this weekend? And that's, again, those are EV Chinese manufacturers. Only 7% have actually received ads from them so far. So we'll keep an eye on that and see if that increases at all. Josh Simmons, 90, says, what will happen to the Canadian pension and healthcare system if Alberta leaves the country? Chaos. Chaos could happen. There's a lot. That's, again, it comes back down to Alberta independence is APP, essentially. And all of that gets really confusing really quickly. So Alberta would likely go to, imagine, a similar model to the United States in terms of how their healthcare works. But the CPP stuff gets really messy really quickly. And that's where I see the most tension happening and why it would take years upon years for independence to actually take place, because there's so much that's tied in with Alberta and Canada. It would be a mess. And then as well, if Alberta left, it would spell the end of conservatism or any hope for conservatism in Canada, because you'd be a perpetual liberals in power, like we've seen for the past 10 years. So Leans LXX281 says, hit the like button, folks, please. Yes, hit the like button before on your way out, before you end off. I know we are now we're moving into the end of our show today, but really do thank you for your time, for coming on and doing your things. This has been a great time, great conversation, and we'll see where all this goes. I'm hoping that, I know this was a heavy topic today. I'm hoping I didn't scare anybody. I think that's more so my concern. I hope I didn't scare anybody. I'm hoping there's just more so vigilance of what's happening, rather than everyone running around with their heads cut off, like, oh my gosh, what's happening? It's like, okay, you can like it, you can dislike it, but this is kind of likely what we're seeing on the global stage right now, and hopefully it can help you at least make sense of what's happening at the very end of the day. Marca Perusa 1 says, what issue set does Conservative Party need to pivot, if at all, at the Conservative Convention this month? I think, I don't know if there's going to be a significant pivot. I think the focus is going to come back down to affordability, because people care about the economy, they care about their housing. Those issues have not been improving. However, we're going to have to wait and see, because once Parliament comes back next week, we're going to see what the narrative is going to be set by the media, and that's why shows like this exist. We're trying to reset that narrative. However, with people who follow CBC and CTV, they're going to follow a specific perspective, and what is laid out, how CBC paints us. We'll have to see how people react, and how people react is what is likely going to have to be the pivot from the Conservative Party, if any at all. So great question, Marco. Natalie Fournier says, everything that Carney is doing is bringing us closer to the social credit score. Yep. Social credit score, carbon credits system, all of that is, again, it's all centralization of power and all of that. So, however, grab hold that I think that stuff is actually further away than we think, because of where things are at. Sure. NATO is openly ready to support China, it seems like, at this point, because of what US is doing. So, as I said, someone's going to win. Someone's going to win. Someone's going to lose. And whoever wins this battle is what's going to lead to what ends up happening next with our country. So it is fascinating. Vince of New Scotland says, liberal math, 1 + 1 = 1. Yep. Fair enough. Oh man. I had my TikTok. I posted a TikTok over the weekend about just this whole situation and what's been happening. Just like, everyone just all of a sudden saying, yeah, China, we love China. I'm going to start learning Mandarin now, and not understanding the monster that we're getting into bed with. And man, people were upset about that post, man. People hated me. The left came at me hard on that one. And I was like, guys, they've killed our people. Like, they've imprisoned our people. They've put bounties on the heads of Canadians. Joe Tay, for example. Like, I'm sorry, Donald Trump hasn't put a bounty on the head of a Canadian. Like, I'm sorry, folks. Like, I just don't know where you want me to go with this one, man. And thank you, Lens LXX281, for putting in the Promethean Action YouTube channel. Yeah, they're putting out some interesting stuff, very thought-provoking. That's where, that's honestly, that episode was what was a huge point of putting this episode together today, because they're putting some thought-provoking situations out. As I said, all the facts they put out, very much verifiable. It's more so the things that you need to be questioning is the connections and the connections and the conclusions they've come to. Those are up for debate and question, similar to what I did today. I kind of showed you the facts and things that are happening in the world. This is what I'm concluding, what I'm seeing. However, up for debate, 100% up for debate, because there's a lot at stake here, and we need to talk about it. Marco Perusa says, how can conservatives get young people to vote more? Well, it's going to come down to having impact on our campuses, having impact on the youth, and it's already doing. Conservatives are already making some significant moves on the level of the youth. It's just getting more into culture. It's important to be relevant in culture. Right now, the conservative brand in Canada is still seen as a bit stodgy to some youth. Polyev has been huge. Like, he's actually really improved youth engagement, but there's still a lot of more work to be done. So the one thing conservatives can do is start impacting culture, impacting music, impacting arts. Like, those are things that, that's why Donald Trump got elected, man. He was so good at impacting culture that it started becoming cool to like him leading up to that 2024 election at this point. Sorry, I'm losing track of days. But holy smokes, what a time to be alive. I'm going to end it there, folks. But man, what a great show. Thank you for everything you guys are. And as for me, I'm out.